Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and today we'll be checking out a starter build for the Yellow Line Rune Keeper in the Lord of the Rings Online. The Yellow Line Rune Keeper is a great option for leveling, and it has some nice crowd control and utility to go along with its decent damage and AoE potential. So this is what my build's going to look like, and something special I want to highlight in this episode is some of the neat things that you can do with builds and just flexibility that clash traits offer. So this is a build that I would typically not bring into group content, but it is actually made for soloing high tier delving content on this Runekeeper at the level cap. So there are some things that might look weird and maybe different from what we build with a starter build, but that's because it's built for a specific use. So as usual with these starter builds, you can use them as a starter point and change them depending on what traits will fit better for your character and what you do in the game as we go over them. Anyway, that aside, let's go ahead and re-specialize and see what we get for just speccing into the yellow line. Well, to start off, we get two abilities. One is going to be Writ of Lightning and the other is Sustaining Bolt. Sustaining Bolt is going to be an attunement consumer that does moderate damage, but also will decrease your power costs, which isn't really the biggest effect. Eventually, Sustaining Bolt will become a little bit more useful and have different things going on with it. And as we can see, Lightning Skills actually have a chance to make it free, so you don't even need to consume attunement with it when you get that proc. Otherwise, we get Writ of Lightning, which is an attunement builder ability that also applies a lightning mitigation debuff that stacks up to 3 times for a total of minus 15% lightning mitigation, which is pretty good, and it does light damage on top of that. Just to specify, not the light type of damage, it does lightning damage, but not a ton of damage. Anyway, setting that technicality aside, let's spec in and see what we get right off the bat with the first row of traits. First one is going to be Ceaseless Argument, which is an active ability with 2-second cooldown and just builds 1 attunement, a very good quick ability to use to build attunement, so we're going to go ahead and tentatively put 1 point in that. Otherwise, we can get Crit Defense, which is nice if you need a survivability boost, but honestly not the biggest impact. What I tend to prefer, especially when you're running content where enemies can be dazed, is to buff Shocking Touch. So Shocking Touch is one of our many utility abilities that applies a brief daze to the enemy as well as doing some damage and returning you towards neutral attunement. So I think buffing that, getting the longer daze duration and more damage out of it, is generally going to be more impactful than Crit Defense. But there have been times in certain content I run where I just never end up using Shocking Touch, so I do get more value out of Crit Defense. But generally, especially starting on and doing landscape content, would prefer to just buff Shocking Touch. Moving on, that will unlock the next row, and we have a couple exciting choices. One is giving us percent critical chance, so we can get up to 5% critical chance. And why I specify percent is because this other trait gives us Fate. 1 rank in that is going to be the most valuable, as it gives us 15,000 Fate right off the bat, but rank 5 will only double that to 30,000 Fate. Just for reference, these are the numbers at level 140, so they may vary for your character depending on your level. But what does Fate give us? Well, the main thing of interest is going to be critical rating. And with even 15,000 Fate or 30,000 Fate, it's not an insignificant amount of critical rating because you get 2.5 crit per point of Fate. So for example, you would get 37.5k critical rating at level 140 in rank 1, and it would be double that at rank 5 with 75,000. And I realize those numbers might not mean too much to you, so to give a little bit of context, I have 738,000 crit rating right now. It's not really the best, and something that could improve that is getting this Fate trait. That said, just getting a raw increase in our critical chance will overall be more effective, but it's important to keep in mind 1 point in increasing Fate can be quite worthy for that critical rating increase that it would provide. Otherwise, we will look at other things for now as we unlock the next row. So in this row, the first thing that we can get is our Lightning Runestone, which is really helpful with utility. It just goes at the ground and can stun enemies in AoE, so that is very nice to have. Again, tentatively put a point in it as it's an active ability. And the next trait in this row is going to be a part of our buff chain, which there are 3 traits within this that we want to look at. So with this, your lightning abilities have a 15% chance to boost your crit chance. At rank 5, it will still be a 15% chance to get this effect, but it will be up to 20% critical hit chance, which is really nice to get that extra crit chance, because in general, critting is important as a Yellow Line Runekeeper. Just to point out, the next trait within this branch is going to be Harsh Debate, which has the same effect but for tactical damage instead of crit chance. And then the third one is where we get a combined effect of the two. So eventually this trait will increase the proc chance of these prior two traits in the branch, Thunderous Words and Harsh Debate, but also if you have both buffs become active, they actually combine into one buff that has further effects than their individual effects. And this further effect is on Epic Conclusion. This increases the damage that Epic Conclusion does and also reduces its cooldown in half. So I realize we do not have Epic Conclusion yet, but that will be in the next row what we're currently at. And this will make Epic Conclusion have half the cooldown, which means in general that you want to use Epic Conclusion when you have both the Thunderous Words and Harsh Debate combined buff with Closing Remarks. So it's pretty much best to save Epic Conclusion for that, but you can of course use it outside of those procs if you wish. Anyway, I wanted to go ahead and cover all three of these traits because they're all linked together and they do have a shared impact. But for the purposes of the starter build, Thunderous Words is going to be the one. Getting that crit hit chance will be very helpful, and building towards Closing Remarks, which is going to be important. But otherwise, in the next row, we actually have a couple different options. One, we have Epic Conclusion, which I've already hinted at is important. It's our Epic Conclusion. How could we not pick this trait? Statically Charged, which buffs our Lightning Runestone. It also gives a slow effect to the Runestone at rank 2 and rank 3, but of interest, at rank 3, the special effect is you can target the Runestone where you want it on the ground. It'll become a ground target ability, so that can be very helpful for utility. But in my experience, I would tend to rather start building towards Closing Remarks than getting the Runestone to be ground targeted. But if you want, you can go ahead and get that. If you're doing a lot of AoE situations in the Runekeeper where that AoE stun can be valuable and targeting on the ground, it can definitely be worth putting points in this. It's just a matter of what you are doing on your character. And now that we have all 5 points in Thunderous Words, we do unlock Harsh Debate, and putting 3 points in that will unlock our next row. So in the next row, we once again have an active ability and already touched on Closing Remarks here. So with Vivid Imagery, that is actually going to be one of our strongest abilities, even in single target situations. It just does a ton of damage, basically. And it is an AoE, and as Daze, it is going to be close range as a note. So it's a close range AoE ability that again does tons of damage and even worth using in single target. Right now, it has a 1-minute cooldown and does build Battle Attunement instead of consuming it. I think I did forget to mention, but Epic Conclusion is going to be our big consumer that returns us to neutral attunement and does damage based on how much battle attunement you have, so you typically want to use it at max battle attunement. Anyway, that aside, our other options are basically the same as before, so I will continue into Harsh Debate and start getting points into Closing Remarks. The first point in that is going to be most important because you get the grand combined effect, but you can continue to put points in it. That said, I do think now could be a good time to remember some of your other options, again if you want the AoE with the Runestone and having that ground targeted, or going ahead and putting 1 point in Fortune Smiles to actually boost your crit chance, which will impact you a lot more out of the combined buff here. So this is the time that I would go ahead and go back and get that 1 point in Increased Fate. And conveniently with that 1 point, we have unlocked the next row. So in the next row, we have first Furious Storms, which makes lightning skills give another buff. And this is going to be separate from our other buffing abilities when we use lightning skills, but it is another one with similar effects. So whenever you use a lightning skill, you can build the stacking effect of increased lightning critical damage. At rank 5, this will increase the proc chance to 100%. So at that point, every lightning skill you use will increase your lightning critical damage by 5%, stacking up to 5 times for a grand total of 25% crit damage. It takes a little bit to build up, but if you're chaining combat together, you can basically keep this on you until, again, you're out of combat, I suppose, for 9 seconds. But if you stay in combat a lot, this is an effect you will often have at its maximum magnitude. Otherwise, for the next trait in this row, we have Perfect Imagery. which at first just increases the targets of vivid imagery. Right now it only hits 5 targets, which is pretty decent, but if you really want it to hit more targets, you can put points in it for that. But the main effect is going to be decreasing its cooldown in half to 30 seconds. That's going to be pretty significant because you can use it twice as frequently and ultimately get twice as much damage out of it, and it's even for survivability just nice AoE days outside of its huge damage that it does. So that is a pretty good option to consider now. But I tend to prefer traits that give us an overall or all-around effect that aren't on one specific skill, especially one that has a minute or even a 30-second cooldown. So I will look elsewhere for my trait points, and I think this works out perfectly that if you put 5 points in Furious Storms, that will unlock the next row, and you will have that guaranteed chance to boost your lightning critical damage on lightning abilities. So with that in mind, we have unlocked the next row. And the first trait here is going to be Concession and Rebuttal, which is a 3-minute cooldown ability that gives us a bonus to a few of our abilities. And this actually has a 3-minute duration or expires if out of combat, but the buff is going to be consumed as you use these different abilities. So with 5 charges, you can use those charges as you wish to either have Sustaining Bolt return power, that's not the most effective. Rid of Lightning, you can instantly apply the max rank debuff. Again, Rid of Lightning, the debuff stacks up to 3 times, so you can get that all instantly with 1. And the most impactful one, damage-wise, is going to be Epic Conclusion gives a trailing dot, which is actually relatively decent damage, and that is going to be helpful for just raw damage. And then Shocking Words will also slow the target after being stunned. So there are some utility applications with this, but with the 5 charges, it would be best to try to consume all 5 with Epic Conclusion, but that can be tough as you're trying to maintain the Rid of Lightning buff. You also want to consume your Sustaining Bolt when you have it free of cost, and sometimes you might even be able to work in Shocking Words into your rotation. But that is just something to consider with this. It's going to be a trait that's eventually worth getting, but let's look at the other option, which is a utility option here, Flashing Images. So when you use Steady Hands, that's going to be the ability that swaps attunement. So if you're at Battle Attunement, it will completely swap to Healing Attunement and also gives you no power cost for a short duration. This will give you a short buff, a 6-second buff, so after you use Steady Hands, if you use an ability that returns you to neutral attunement, you will actually activate the Steady Hands effect again instead of returning to neutral attunement. So how that actually works in combat is if you're at full battle attunement, you use Steady Hands, then you use something to return to neutral attunement like Word of Exaltation, your bubble, which you can use on yourself, you'll then be at full battle attunement to use your battle attunement abilities again. It can also work in the reverse order, but that can be very helpful utility for us. So as far as spending trait points go, I would rather go ahead and get Concession and Rebuttal to get that strong cooldown. And then because I really like the general utility provided by having flashing images, that is probably what I would get. But if you find yourself never using Steady Hands or in content where you don't really need to quickly flip with Steady Hands to give yourself like a bubble and give you some healing before you return to battle and fighting things and getting your battle attunement, then it might not be worth picking for you, but I will go ahead and put a point in it for the starter build. And now we have to look back at some previous traits. So moving forward, the main benefit of choosing Closing Remarks for some of our remaining points is to get the increased proc chance from Thunderous Words and Harsh Debate, which would be quite helpful so we get the combined effect more frequently and can utilize Epic Conclusion to its fullest potential more frequently as well, and it does actually give Epic Conclusion even more damage in that combo. Otherwise, another option for 4 trait points as well is increasing vivid imagery targets and reducing the cooldown if you find yourself really wanting that. And again, to highlight, getting the ground target runestone is another option as well. So ultimately, you would actually end up getting all 3 of these, at least if you follow the starter build and want all those effects. So yes, even though ultimately you'll get all 3 of those, the order I tend to prefer to get them in is first Closing Remarks and then 4 points into Perfect Imagery, and then we'll get 3 points in statically charged, and that will leave us with 7 trait points we need to spend. So with 7 trait points that we still need to spend, there are a couple particularly high value traits that we should look at and other specs. The first one for the starter build that we can really get to is going to be just raw increased tactical damage, 1% extra. That will be quite helpful and beneficial. Another one is going to be if you want this heal mending verse. It's not the most impactful heal, and it gets a whole lot better if you actually have this trait in the second row to decrease its induction. That one will help a lot and increase its pulse count. But if you really find yourself wanting an extra heal, you can get this one. It can provide some utility in group content. You can off heal, even if you don't have another healer, that could potentially be an option. And that really depends on what your use case is. But another trait that could really be worth considering is getting 1 point in determination for 15,000, again, with my character's level, 15,000 will. And as a Runekeeper, the main thing that will gives us is going to be 3 tactical mastery. It does also give 1 finesse and 1 tactical mitigation for other stats that are important to keep in mind from that. So given all the benefits that you can get from just 1 point in this with 15,000 will, that will be pretty high value, but it will cost 2 trait points, just to point out, but that is going to be the highest value thing from here. Now we are left with, I think the main debate here is going to be between deliberate address for just raw tactical damage or increasing our fate, which will ultimately increase our tactical crit chance. Now, I should point out that historically in LOTRO, a lot of traits that give raw stats like this didn't really scale too well, but they have made some adjustments and patches where it is more worthy to get the fate and will trait than it used to be. There are times in the future where the scaling might not work so well, or times at certain levels where it does work so well, so it's important to know what fate does for your character and what impact you can get out of it. For example, on my character, putting 1 more point into Fortune Smiles will give me 0.2% crit chance. So if I put 2 ranks into Fortune Smiles, that would cost me 2 trait points, and that would give me 0.4% crit chance. The other option that I have is 1% tactical damage. So essentially we are weighing 0.4% crit chance to 1% damage. To really min-max and get the most for your character, whatever level they are and whatever stats they have, it's probably best to test. I know this is something that takes a little bit of time in knowing more about your character, but if you really do want to do that, I would recommend testing which would give you the most value at this point between fate and tactical damage, and you can even test with will. That would be another factor in this equation. Is it better to get 3,000 will or 1% tactical damage? For me, it's better to get 1% tactical damage than just 3,000 will. The big jump with 15,000 will was definitely worth it though. So all of that said, I would tend to prefer 0.4% crit chance than 1% damage on the Lightning Runekeeper, especially considering critical hits are so important for us. And we do have a lot of critical damage. You can actually test the stat weight for your character using the plugin Combat Analysis if you're interested in more details and trying to find how much you should be valuing upgrading your percent critical chance versus percent damage. But again, for this character and this character stats and what I have seen at lower levels, it is going to be worth just getting the fate. So if I put all 5 points in that, that will actually only be 49 trait points spent. So if I technically wanted to spend exactly 50 trait points, I would only do 4 points in fate and then do the leftover point in tactical damage. But because this is something where you would go in the future, we'll start with 49 trait points there and then spend, it would be 2 more trait points to get deliberate address. So that would be the 51 trait point build. It's always rough ending these episodes on either 49 trait points or 51 trait points, but the whole point is that they're a starter build and that exact number doesn't really matter too much. We did finish out the yellow line, so that is the most important part, so we'll go ahead and apply that and end there. Further in the build, you have a few options in the red line to boost some of your damage and perhaps give you some fire skill options and even some survivability options. Similarly, in the blue line, you could get a little bit more utility, which is typically what I would do, but there are a couple key traits that you could find of interest in the red line, such as increasing your physical mitigation for survivability. You also might have seen before we respec'd at the start of this guide that I had stuff that boosted self-motivation, physical mitigation, and I even had overflowing confidence because that gave self-motivation a heal, and these ones allowed self-motivation to be used on the go with no induction and have a shorter cooldown. Again, that was for a specific use case with delvings. Let's go ahead and take a look at the set bonuses. So the first one just gives us Fury of Storm, which is your lightning abilities, gives us increased lightning damage, pretty simple. Second one is going to add some extra debuffs to Rid of Lightning, so now it can increase enemy inductions and reduce their attack duration. So in addition to the susceptibility to lightning attacks with decreasing their lightning mitigation, it now has those debuffs with it. Next trait is going to make lightning skill critical hits restore some of your power. If you happen to run into power issues, that's one that would help with that, but probably not too impactful overall. And an interesting trait here, and another reason crit chance is important, is because you get increased crit chance per battle attunement and increased crit damage. At 10 battle attunement, which is the maximum, you would have 10% extra crit chance and 30% extra critical damage. So that's yet another reason for us to try to stay at high battle attunement in combat. Next set bonus is going to make Sustaining Bolt also heal morale, and the morale that it heals is based on battle attunement. It's actually a pretty helpful heal. With my numbers, it's roughly 10% max morale, and that's actually at 0 battle attunement. The next set bonus is going to be Refutation, which makes any critical hit you get with a lightning ability, your next attack after that crit will penetrate some of the enemy's tactical mitigation, ultimately allowing it to do more damage. It can be difficult to line up in practice, but if you do get a critical hit with a lightning ability, it can be a good time to try to line up a really strong ability that you want to penetrate even more mitigation. And finally, the last set bonus is a really exciting one because it is an active ability. It's going to be a melee range ability in a frontal cone in front of you, but it does a lot of damage, Static Surge. So to unlock Static Surge, this is going to be a proc ability. So when you use a lightning skill, it will give you a 10% chance to activate Static Surge. Now Static Surge itself has a 3-second cooldown and attunes 1 battle attunement. So if you keep on proccing, you can use it quite frequently and it is really strong. You do have to be again in melee range though. And just as a little tip towards the end of this episode, I did want to point out you actually have a couple things for melee range that could be important to keep in mind. If you did not get the ground targeted traits for the Fulgurite Runestone, that would be in melee range. Similar to Vivid Imagery, that again, strongest ability basically, and that is in melee range, and now Static Surge is in melee range in a frontal cone as well. And as usual, I do run the standard DPS package on this character in the yellow line, which includes Loyalty, Honesty for Tactical Mastery, Wit for all of the benefits it provides, and then Confidence and Wisdom as well. You can check out my stats guide and virtues guide for more information on these and some other options for defenses such as Fidelity and Tolerance, if you want to boost your defenses and tactical mitigation even more. And that is all for the starter guide on a 50 trait point build for the Yellow Line Lightning Rune Keeper. I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something useful, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more or becoming a channel member to support the content and get access to guides like this early. And thanks for watching, everyone.